G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Spark Your Fire. I'm your host David Shih, and with me today, as always, the lovely John Comino, smiling on the other side of the camera. How are you, mate?
I'm very well, David. The lovely John Comino. Very nice. How's the lovely David Shih?
I should say, the Caminos is always smiling. That's good. There
That's right.
hasn't been a single day where you guys aren't happy, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. No, everything is good. Doing well. Property market's chugging along here in Sydney, but doing well. How are you doing?
Good, good. I'm looking forward to my Europe trip, that's for sure. So
Yeah.
next couple of weeks, I think we'll be missing a few episodes. I hope I don't think the listeners going to miss me, that's for sure. They're going to miss you. That's the only issue, John. So make sure you do some recordings and put it on.
We'll see. We'll see. But it's totally worth it. You'll have a great time.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I'll might have a bit of tan too, see how we go. But apparently I think it's getting colder there, so maybe not, maybe not.
Right. Right. Oh, that's okay. You'll have a great time. Yeah.
Thanks, John. So look, it hasn't been much of a property news at the moment. So look, I thought today we'll jump straight into our topics of interest, which we both love talking about,
Mm.
right? Like, just basically giving our opinions in terms of, different type of property topics and discussions. And again, none of this is scripted. John and I basically have nothing in front of us. We just thought, here's an idea. Let's just go in and have a chat around and to see what came out of this discussion. So,
Great.
so John, one of the questions that I get asked by my clients, should I be redlining my borrowing capacity? As a property investor, and again, I'm asking John as the property investor here, not a buyer's
Mm.
agent. I need you to take the buyer's agent hat off here. Um, should you, as a property investor, do you think that it's a wise idea to be redlining your borrowing capacity and push yourself to the absolute maximum?
Uh, yes. So I think I think most of the time it is worth it. A couple of reasons. But I think it depends, and there was always going to be it depends component
There's
of
always
the
a
answer,
but.
and the answer to that is it depends on your age. I think really. So
Okay.
if you're young and you know that your income is in a cent, I think that it's a good idea. Um, but let me make a couple of remarks. Again, I haven't scribbled anything down, so this is all going off what's left of my pickled brain. So I think that you should, depending on your age. And I know that when I made my first property, I went right to my limit.
Mhm.
Um, and and my view was that while you can lose money on real estate, like a buy and hold apartment in an inner ring suburb of Sydney should be okay if I hold it for long enough, and I intend to pay down principal. So the buffer that you can create for yourself, so it takes the pressure off the property to be going up, is paying off principal. Um, so I think that it's okay.
Assumption here is the repayment side of things can be kept up, I guess, from a P&I repayment perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because let's say, for example, you bought one, two, three properties, and if you have all of them on principal and interest repayment in today's environment and in today's interest rate, that is a lot of cash flow drain.
Mm.
Especially if you're buying, that just said, like, even scrap the idea of buying in Sydney. Like, don't even think about anything
Yeah.
in Sydney at the moment for that kind. Like, let's just say hypothetically, you bought a couple of Brisbane properties, cash flow or yield wise isn't too bad, looking at about 4 to 5% gross rental yield. Even on an interest only repayment today, it's going to be negative. On the principal and interest repayment today, it's going to be
Mm.
even more negative. So, John, how will people be able to support that? Like, given that if they are absolutely redlining in, my main concern will
Mm.
be cash flow. How do they maintain cash flow on a P&I repayment basis?
So if you can't support the cash flow, you shouldn't redline.
Mm.
And this is part of the analysis that yourself as a lender and the banks do. So we're talking about what an acceptable level of risk is. So the big four take a more conservative approach, or the big five if you include Macquarie Bank these days.
Yep.
And the kind of second tier lenders, maybe a Pepper or a Liberty, might take a different view. But of course, if you can't afford the repayments, don't go into that much debt. But the lender would have a perspective on how much is too much debt for you, and
Yep.
I feel like in most instances their perspective would be more conservative than your own perspective. So you might think, well, I can afford those repayments, and they're assuming that I'm going to buy a plasma TV every month, and I'm not going to. And so one of the things that I think in the bank's assumptions are that you can adjust your spending to suit your new cost structure, which might include a higher mortgage repayment. I think people have very flexible spending habits. So I think that if you push yourself on the property, I think that the rewards are there. You're going to get a better property. You're also going to get a higher rental if you're an investor. I mean, everyone needs to make their own risk assessment, but if like a second tier lender is willing to give you a loan which is at the upper end of your comfort level, if you can adjust your spending to accommodate it, it's worth it. It's worth it, I think.
Back in your days, John, just out of curiosity, did you when you were in your acquisition phase, were you doing your P&I repayments across for all your investment properties as well, or at some point in time, were you able to use interest-only repayment strategies to maximize and optimize your cash flow as well?
So we would buy, let's say, one property. At one stage, it was a property a year. Prior to that, it was a bit less frequent, but it was free. It was quite regular. We would always put them on P&I initially, and then when we buy the next property, we would take those off P&I. So we would have the latest acquisition on P&I, mainly because you kind of want to. I always wanted to give myself some buffer in case the market went against me in the first year. I didn't want it to affect my equity. We would always put a recently purchased property on P&I, and then it would go on to interest only a year or two later.
I see. Okay, so during the initial acquisition phase, you put it as a P&I, but you moved the previous properties into an interest only.
Exactly
right. And the idea is just to de-risk some of the loans, the lending that you initially had for maybe a year or two before you turn them into interest only. Yes.
100%. I always felt like the riskiest period of owning a property are the first couple of years. So if you own a property for 30 years, if the market goes down by 5%, you don't care at all. If the market goes down by 5% in the second year that you own a property, that you've got a problem. So we would always do some P&I at the beginning and then shuffle it out of P&I.
That's an interesting strategy. I think that's definitely something that's worth exploring a bit more.
Right.
No, thanks for sharing that, John.
But that just to put a bow on it, though, that's how that kind of is the justification for my view that, you probably should go to the red line. If you're young and if your income's rising, you should go to the red line and then manage your debt and manage your finance, because the rewards are far greater from spending more money in real estate. What else are you going to spend it on? Are you going to spend it on at the movies or whatever? Like spending as much as you can on real estate, it usually pays off in a medium-term horizon.
I do agree with you, John. I think that's sensible, but at the same time, I think a lot of people lack the actual discipline to be able to save. I mean, even just let's say, for example, even be able to push to themselves. But putting that assumption aside, let's say, for example, assume that they do have enough resources to be able to purchase and be able to redline to whatever property they need to get into. I guess from my perspective, I'm more of a lifestyle first type of person. So in other words, lifestyle first, invest along the way as well, to a degree. So yes, I put that as a bit of a maybe, depends, like similar to you, because it really depends on the type of clientele, their age bracket, their spending pattern, their ethnic groups. There's a lot of complexity that's behind it in terms of whether this person should be redlining, plus their own risk appetite, their perceived risk appetite. Most of the time they'll be hitting up that fork road to say, should I be getting a Liberty or a Pepper loan that's giving me about 8% interest rate in today's market, right? And should I be redlining that to that point in time? And I think the answer to that really comes down to, personally, to say, if you purchase this property, is it going to impact your lifestyle? That's probably one of the key questions that I will want the borrower to be able to answer themselves. If you do that calculation yourself to say, okay, well, if I'm going to buy a property and I'm going to be paying, let's say, 8% plus interest rate in that instance, and I can pretty much accurately estimate my cash flow,
Yep.
In other words, how much I need to put out of my pocket. Is that going to be putting myself into a difficult position?
Mhm.
And is that going to impact my lifestyle? If it is, then I think you should think about it again,
Yep.
personally. Okay. But that's not to say you shouldn't do it, right? If you have a backup and if you have a good mitigant strategy to be able to offset that, let's say, for example, buy a really good high cash flow type of property to be able to offset that, potentially, yes. Or if you know, just like, for example, you know that you're on a growth trajectory in terms of your employment, your income is going to go up in the next few years.
Yep.
And therefore, we would have a way to be able to refinance you out of
Yes.
Liberty or Pepper. Then yes, I would say absolutely do it. Right. But back in the foremost type of, I would say, yes, you probably want to put your lifestyle first because ultimately everyone has to live to a degree, right? You don't want to be on instant noodles and Maggies and every day just to be able to get a property that's with an 8% interest rate. That's
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Although I think to be reasonable, like I think it's a balancing act between your lifestyle. Like when I bought early properties, my lifestyle took a massive hit. And I mentioned the first property I bought, which I went all in on. I was it affected my abilities to go out, and I was living in London at the time, and all the traveling stopped because I couldn't afford it. I had a mortgage then, so.
Maggie's noodle did you have back at the time?
Well, I was an expat. I was eating Maggi noodles anyway. It was gross, but but I mean, I totally accept that. I don't mind sacrificing a little bit of the lifestyle up front, as long as there's a reward in the end. It's okay.
That's why you're reaping the reward now, right? Because you put in the hard yards around your 20s and the 30s, right? So you took the difficult path, which most people probably wouldn't have at that point in time. You made the decision to redline your borrowing capacity just to be able to get one or two more properties at that point. Yes, you sacrifice your lifestyle a little bit, but you find a balancing act to be okay. You can accept it. And you got a mitigating strategy in place to be able to hold them. You pay down a bit of debt and then turn them into interest only afterwards. 10, 20 years down the track, that's where you reap the rewards, essentially.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. So I'd like to make one more argument for going as close to your limit as you can.
Okay.
And that is that, let me set this up a little bit. So, buyers agents used to do things like property plans, and that's gone out of fashion a little bit. And the reason that property plans, to build a 5-property portfolio over 6 years or something like that, the reason that's gone out of fashion is because you can only really do property purchasing one property at a time. The minute you purchase a property, you have to reset your finances and then figure out what you can borrow the next time. Because you don't know what you're going to be able to borrow for the second property. All you know is what you can borrow now.
Yes.
For a property. So we don't do 5-property plans anymore, acquisition plans. So what does that mean? It means you don't know what you can borrow for your second property. So you have to go all in on the one that's right there. It's like looking at a staircase and looking at all the stairs. Or really should just be conscious of the next step. And because you can't plan for all of the acquisitions you're going to make, even if you aspire to a portfolio, you only know what you can purchase right now and what you can borrow right now. And because there's so much uncertainty about borrowing, how much you can borrow for the next property, I figure borrow as much as you can now because you don't know what you can borrow the next time.
Okay. Valid point. Although I'm not too sure how out-fashioned the property plan is. I mean, I'm sure I still saw a couple from buyers agents recently. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When I do my modeling with my clients, I do map it out. But we buy low value type of properties, right? Like talking about $600,000-$700,000. So it's a lot easier to predict in that case. Whereas I guess if you're looking at purchasing in Sydney, it's a slightly different story. Because
maybe that's the difference. Although it is depressing that 600,000 or 700,000 is considered low value. I mean that's a lot of money.
Thanks to the inflation.
But yeah, that's right. But yeah, that's so. My opinion at the time was we'll figure it out later. So if we're going to buy a property after this one, let's get this one under our belts, and then we'll go back to the well and we'll figure out how attractive we are to the bank when we come back in a year's time. But right now, if this is what I can get, 800,000 or whatever it is, that's what we're going to spend.
That's where you would be. Okay, good. All right. Let me pose another question for you,
Yeah.
John. Again, it's somewhat related to borrowing capacity as well. So similar type, but different because I think I'm not sure about you, or have you been recently being asked, but I've been asked a lot when by purchasing under trust. So people tend to have this tendency, or I don't know where they read it or heard it, they kind of had the idea to go, if I run out of my borrowing capacity under my personal name, I should be looking at buying properties under trust because apparently you can have unlimited borrowing under trust.
Mm.
And when I look back at the fundamentals as to why they want to do that, it's because they're being told or they're very close to getting basically the end of their borrowing capacity under their personal name. And in order for them to be able to continue their journey, they are looking for ways to work around that rather than having a broker or bank to tell them, sorry, John, can't lend you anymore, mate. So they're trying to be on the front foot. And that's why they're coming up with these creative strategies in terms of trying to get finances around it. But bottom line is, should you be afraid? Should you be afraid of running out of borrowing capacity during any kind of property acquisition journey?
Yeah, you should be always be conscious of your attractiveness to the bank, and you should be concerned about running out of serviceability for sure.
But I think
For
isn't
sure.
it a natural course is, I guess, is what I'm trying to point out here. Back at the time when we were building our property portfolio, yes, of course, we will get up to the point where the bank is going to say, sorry, mate, can't lend you anymore. This is the max that we can do. And yes, you can go to Liberties, you can go to Pepper, but there's also so much that you can do. Like, after Liberty, there's no more lending that you can do. At that point in time, what do you do? Like, I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is in a natural course of progression. Like everything just, you can't just continuously buy
Right. Okay.
1 to 10 properties in one go. Definitely not in today's environment, right? So should investors be afraid to be told that, sorry, mate, you have no more borrowing capacity?
Right. Okay. So yes, things changed in 2017 or thereabouts. So 2017, we switched from having sort of an equity model of lending to an income model of lending, or the lenders would argue that like there are two hurdles, income and equity, but nonetheless, it became more serviceability oriented.
Correct.
So what do you do? So there are two things that you do, and should you? I mean, I personally think you should try to find a way, but it all depends on how, if you're in any financial distress with your existing debts. But let's say you're not in any financial distress and you want to keep going, but the bank is saying no. Two options, I think. The first option, I think, is to wait, and just to accept it. Maybe work on your non-real estate related income, get a promotion at work.
Yes.
Get
Change
married. I
jobs.
suppose that can help as well. But the second thing, if you want to take a more active approach, and it sort of comes back to, this is what worked for us, but I would say that you could pivot to paying off the debt. Paying off the debt makes you more refinanceable in a couple of years, and it would bring forward when you can next purchase. Now you can then shuffle that property onto interest only later, but if it's got the same amount of debt, it's going to be harder to reshuffle that onto interest only, I think. Now, you're the lending guy, so I'm not great at this, but I would suggest switching things onto P&I, then going back in a couple of years, 2 years, which is quite soon, with less debt, and then seeing what the bank would say. And I'm almost positive that they would have a more positive view of your circumstances. So, because one of the roadblocks would be your LVR. So you'd have a serviceability problem and an LVR problem. Now, serviceability is tough, but you can do something about the LVR. You can get the L down. You can get the debt down, right? So I would say work on what you can control, which is your debt. Manage that. Try to get that down, and then separately you can be looking at your income and other aspects. But wait or pay some principal off. What do you think?
Yeah, look, and that's the whole point that I'm trying to make here. I think a lot of investors are so afraid of not being able to continue purchase and not being able to continue purchase immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately. I think the key word here is, immediate. And that might be a consequence of a lot of media saying, like these, rags to riches story, 1 to 20 properties or 1 to 10 properties within a couple of years. That kind of mindset has created that expectation for property investors nowadays. John's done 1 to 10 properties in 5 years. Why can't I do that? Right? Like, why am I being told I can only get up to my number 3 property? There must be something that's wrong. Oh, okay. Well, what are the ways that I can actually go around it in order to be able to get up to 10 properties, let's say, for example? But fundamentally, that's not true. Like, it took you 20 years, for example, to build your property portfolio today.
Right.
Rome isn't built overnight. There will be times, and you, as an experienced investor who has gone through this journey, will be able to tell everyone that there are times where you had to stop as well. You had to consolidate, right? You had to
Absolutely.
stop. You were being told by the bank to say you can't do any more at the moment. Fine. You work on your income. Like you said, you work on your income, you get a better job, you change career, that kind of stuff, right? To improve yourself in terms of getting more avenues. And number 2, as you said, potentially pay down a little bit of debt to be able to reduce your overall debt position and to manage your risk in that sense. But the point here is it's not just number 1 to 10 properties straight in one go. It's going to be, let's say, for example, 3 properties this round during this cycle. And then you wait for a couple of years. You work on improving your income. You work on improving your financial situation. You wait for lending to ease. Lending actually goes around in cycles as well, just like property, right? There will be times it's going to be easier to lend money. Most people are not aware of that. Right now, it's actually very challenging to actually borrow money from the banks because of the high interest rate. But that's going to change in the next few years.
Yes.
No, so there will be times where right now you might be disappointed to hear, oh, am I only able to borrow free or to get free properties this cycle? That's not the end of the world. You buy 3 cycles, you accumulate right now, you work on your income, and then you wait for a right time and maybe potentially pay down a little bit of debt if you want to, or my personal preference, keep it interest only, keep that money in your offset account because you can choose to pay down the lump sum or the loan if you need to, so you can still control the L at the time when you want to refinance, except you get more control in terms of your cash flow as well. So, you just park the money in the offset account, gives you that flexibility. But you do that, so you buy properties, you hold, you wait, you work on yourself, improving yourself, getting ready for the next round. And then when lending eases, that's when you can start looking at, if you want to pour some equity, you can pour some equity and be able to do it. And then, bring those properties back from like a Pepper or Liberty back into a major bank again, because lending has eased. So you're able to pull them back up to the top tier lenders who has harsher lending criteria. And then be able to use the likes of Firstmac, Pepper, and Liberty again to be able to continue and push for 1 or 2 more properties. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. It doesn't happen overnight. I think that's one of the things that, when talking to a lot of my new property investor clients nowadays, they all seem to be under this impression and go, oh, I'm stuck already at 2 or 3. Like, why? Like, there must be something wrong, and he's going to jump in.
Right. I see what you're saying. Yeah, you got to let it sit there and marinate for a little bit, and I assure you, we all did as well. So there were periods of time we had to let it sit there and mature a little bit. Let the rents catch up, let the debt go down. Pardon me.
Just like fine wine, you got to let it there ferment and mature.
Exactly. John. That's right. That's right. So the secret is that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So if you're buy and hold investing, you have to have the period of time where you're just letting it mature or marinate in equity, and letting it marinate in inflation, really, which is what we do as buy and hold investors. We're just letting inflation do its thing, but inflation is a cumulative thing.
That's right.
But here's the dirty little secret. The dirty little secret, all the people that the buy and hold investors who have done very well didn't necessarily make their money out of real estate. They made their money in their businesses and they parked the money in real estate. And I think that the people coming into real estate, they're looking at people with 10 properties and 12, they didn't make the money in property necessarily, or they might have made the money in a property adjacent business, but they didn't make it out of rents. They made it in some other aspect of their life, and then they parked the money. They parked the money in real estate. So it's such a different way of thinking about it. So the grass isn't greener. Buy hold investing is very much a marathon. And the people that you think did well out of it probably made their money doing something else, just parked it in real estate.
I think you hit the nail on the jackpot there, mate. Basically, yeah, essentially it's how they make their money. Most people thought it's just because they make their money through a paycheck, but that's not always the case, right? Like, yes, you might start it off with making a paycheck, but ultimately to be able to support a sustainable portfolio of, say, 10 properties, your income also need to be enough to be able to borrow up to that amount. So, that's what we mean by, you get up to the point where you push yourself to the limit, and then essentially you need to work on ways to improve your income, your personal income, whether that's through business, whether that's through another higher job. There's multiple ways to be able to do it. So,
Hang on.
spot on. Thanks, John. Thanks for your wisdom as always, mate. Any other dirty secrets or you just there's
Not
enough?
the dirty ones. No, that's the main one. No.
Okay.
No, that's heaps of divulging for today, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely leaves our listeners to pondering a lot more about what the next dirty secret will be.
Well, let me actually. I'll give you an insight into something that someone. It was a mortgage broker actually that I was speaking to. This has got to be like 10, 15 years ago, and we said to him, how did those people? This is so we were kind of, we had some properties, but we weren't property people, I suppose.
No mogul status yet.
So how do you get to 20 properties? And he said, the way you do it is that every second property that you buy is a flip. He said, he goes, because you need to be able to demonstrate serviceability to the bank. And the only way to demonstrate serviceability is to convert a capital gain into income. And the way you do that is to buy one, flip one, buy one, flip one. And I'm simplifying the message, but he said, you've got to figure out how to do flips. And that's the way you get to big property portfolios. Because if you're working in accounts at Virgin Records, your PAYG salary is not going to be enough to build a 20 property portfolio. You need to figure out how to get that income up. And the way you get that income up is through flips. And that was his advice.
It's interesting though. I'm not sure that's going to apply in today's market, in all honesty, because
that's right.
that's yeah. I mean, I guess, and it's primarily because that will be a once-off capital gains event essentially. And when the banks look at your tax returns, they'll be able to work it out. You sold something. That's why the taxable income is so much higher this year. May not necessarily work under today's lending environment. That's my main concern.
Yeah. There are a couple of tricks there as well, I think. But yeah,
that was interesting.
You're exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. You need to figure out a way to boost your income via real estate without just holding it and relying on the rent.
Well, sounds like that's another topic of discussion for episode, John.
Correct.
We'll wait for you to be able to put out more dirty shirts.
Yeah, that's right. Full of surprises.
Full of surprises always, mate. Well, thank you. And I think, look, let's keep it short and sharp. So that's pretty much all we've covered today. And like I said, I think I'm going to be out of action in the next couple of weeks. So I think we may not necessarily have our regular updates, but we'll pick this back up again towards the end of October at that point in time once I'm back. And but until then, stay safe and have a great week and a great month. We'll see you guys again in another episode of Spark Your Fire. John and David.